Missing person cases can often drag on for years or decades without any new clues being found. And very often, hopes of closing these cases dwindle. But every now and then, there's a major breakthrough in the search for missing people, and the case is either cracked or progress is made into solving an unexplained disappearance. The Franklin Expedition was a group of 128 men traveling on 2 ships to find the lucrative Northwest Passage, a fabled sea route through the islands of North Canada. 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, left London on May 19, 1845. About 2 months later, the ships were spotted in Baffin's Bay, just east of the passage entrance. This is the last time either ship was seen by Europeans for 170 years. The expedition wasn't the first to find the passage, and it had already proven a deadly mission, but the Franklin expedition met with tragedy early on. By April of 1848, 24 men had died, including Franklin himself, though what killed them remains a mystery. It was an unprecedented level of death, and when the ship became stuck in ice near King William Island, the crew abandoned ship and decided to try their odds at finding help across the land. They encountered a number of people, but all remaining sailors died on their trek toward the nearest western outpost. While most of their remains have been found, either in dedicated grave sites or along the route of this trek, there are still countless questions about what happened to them and how they got there. No written record of what happened after the men left the ship was ever found, and search parties had to rely on stories from the Inuit people who'd come across the sailors. However, for a long time, these accounts were mistrusted, as they spoke of the sailors participating in cannibalism. Not only did investigators not want to think the sailors would be this desperate, but they knew the expedition had enough food supplies to have lasted, and some such supplies were actually found with the bodies. There was no need for cannibalism, but cut marks on the bones showed the Inuit stories may have been correct. Other parts of their accounts also didn't make sense though. They described Erebus and Terror trapped in ice, but not in the same location as written records located them. Sure enough, when the ships were located in 2014 and 2016, they were near the location that the Inuit people had described. It's possible the ships drifted there after being abandoned by the sailors, but Inuit described seeing white men on the ship, leading some to believe the expedition chose to remain aboard rather than risk the overland route. Due to issues with the 19th and 20th century investigations, it's unlikely we'll ever know exactly what happened to Franklin's lost expedition, but there's a chance the answers still lie beneath the ice. Tanya Ryder's husband, Tom, became increasingly frustrated at the lack of effort by police to find his missing wife. He'd reported her missing on the 22nd of September 2007, after she'd not been seen since the 19th. On that day, she'd been working at a Fred Meyer department store where she was last seen leaving after her shift. Tanya also had another job where she delivered pizza at night, and Tom therefore wasn't sure that she was missing until 3 days later, after she was last seen. He contacted Bellevue police only to be told that the case was not in their jurisdiction, and that he should contact King County Sheriff's Office. He did as instructed, but was told by the sheriff's office that the disappearance could not be treated as a missing persons case, as she left of her own free will. On the same day, he inquired if her cell phone signal could be traced to try to locate her, but there was no missing persons case, so this was denied. Police then mistakenly assumed that because there'd been activity on Tanya's bank accounts, that she'd left voluntarily, only to be told by Tom that he had access to the account and that he'd used it to buy gas while searching for her. Tom then offered to take a polygraph test to clear himself, and this finally prompted police to treat the disappearance as a missing persons case. Once Tanya's cell phone signal was traced, it was found to be in an area about 5 miles from where she was last seen. A search was organized, and her car was found where it had been left on the side of the road and crashed into a ravine 20 feet from the road. The car had come to a rest on its side, and Tanya had spent 8 days in her overturned car. Most of her weight was on her seatbelt, and she had a broken collarbone and a dislocated shoulder, while just a few miles from home the entire time. On the 7th of July, 2013, Colt Haynes and Molly Miller were in a car that was being driven by a man named James Con Nip. During the drive, at around 10:30 p.m., Nip threw a rock at a police car, and a chase ensued, causing him to drive into the back roads of Love County, Oklahoma, at speeds of up to 120 miles per hour. Nip then drove into the woods near Long Hollow and Oswalt Roads before jumping out of the car and fleeing, leaving Colt and Molly behind. Both Colt and Molly phoned several people during the next few hours, asking to be picked up, and the following morning, 4 people went to the area to search for them. When they couldn't locate either Colt or Molly, they traveled to Nip's house and asked him where he had left them, but he denied having been with them. Colt, however, was on the phone with one of the searchers, and he spoke to Nip, saying, quote, "Tell them where we're at so we can get out of here." But Nip refused, and the 4 friends continued their search for a further 4 hours before giving up. Molly's phone battery died at around 9:39, and Colt's died at around 9:57. That was the last time that anyone spoke to them, and when they were reported missing, their disappearance wasn't taken seriously, as Molly was considered to be a runaway. Then in April of 2021, an informant came forward and revealed information to the FBI about the case, stating that they knew what had happened to Molly. The FBI believes that someone witnessed what happened to both Colt and Molly, and a probable cause affidavit for a search warrant of the area where they were last seen has been submitted. It concerns a property on Pike Road that police claimed had been searched, but it later came to light that a part of the property had in fact not been searched. An investigator on the case has stated that they cannot give out any details on Nip and his involvement at the moment, as it might affect the integrity of the case. However, as soon as a judge signs off on the search warrant and is accepted by the district attorney, details will be released to the public. In the 7 years since Colt and Molly's disappearances, there have been very few leads to go on, but investigators are hopeful that these new developments will help them finally crack the case. The search warrant will be executed as soon as it's revealed by the area's tribal police. The Hampshire Constabulary has issued a fresh appeal for information about 44-year-old Jo Sheen, who has been missing in Southampton since December of 2019. Jo, who was a mother of 3, was last heard from in December of 2019, and when her family hadn't heard from her in almost 2 months, they reported her missing in February of 2020. According to the latest appeal that has been released to YouTube and social media, Jo, also known as JoJo or Little Joe to her friends and family, was last seen in the Nicholston area of Southampton by a police officer on November 30th, 2019. According to the Hampshire Constabulary, Jo's last confirmed movements were on December 5th, 2019, when she made the 14-mile journey from Fareham to Southampton with a friend. After this, Jo has not been seen or heard from, and almost 2 years later, her family is desperate for answers. Shortly after she was reported missing, the Hampshire Constabulary conducted wide-scale searches of Empress Road in Southampton. It was also during this time they revealed that Jo had no fixed address or bank account, and announced that they were searching homeless shelters and asking people to keep an eye out in surrounding towns and cities. In November of 2020, the Hampshire Constabulary made a shocking announcement when they revealed that they had arrested 5 men in connection with Jo's disappearance. These men were never publicly named, and just weeks after their arrests, they were cleared and released without charges. The Hampshire Constabulary has not released any further information and has refused to comment on what grounds or evidence the men were arrested on. The latest appeal was made to their YouTube channel and social media accounts on November 30th, 2021. Jo Sheen is described as a white female, 5'1" with a slim build and long dark brown hair. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Hampshire Constabulary on 101, quoting Operation Blackboard, or if you wish to remain anonymous, you can contact Crime Stoppers at 0800 555 111. On the 19th of January 2019, Olivia Ambrose was having a few drinks in Hennessy's bar in Boston. At 11:08 p.m., surveillance footage shows her leaving Hennessy's, and she's spotted again at 11:37 p.m. walking on Union and North Streets, appearing to be intoxicated and having difficulty walking. At 11:38, she's once again captured on camera near North and Congress Streets, where 2 men were seen watching her. She stumbled across the street and was approached by the 2 men, and once she reached the other side, they began to follow her. 12 minutes later, she's seen on MBTA surveillance being guided by one of them, his arm wrapped around her while she struggled to walk. At 12:06 a.m., she's spotted by an eyewitness, as well as another camera, walking on Austin Street, still being guided by the man who is now alone with Olivia. They're seen one more time in the same state, captured by a home security system on Green Street. The following day, Olivia's sister tried to locate her with the use of the Find My iPhone app, which Olivia had installed on her phone. The results showed that her phone was in the area of Watford Way and Corey Street, just 13 minutes from her house. Police assembled a task force to search the area where her iPhone was located and showed residents in the area photos from the surveillance video. People in the area told them that the man in the photos resembled a man who was living in a nearby apartment, Victor Pena. One detective went to Boston Housing Authority to find more information on the tenant, while the other detectives retrieved a booking photo from a previous charge against Pena. During this time, it came to light that Olivia's phone had now been switched on and that she'd been messaging her mother. Police made their way to Pena's apartment, where they found that the door had a private lock installed, which was not allowed by the housing authority. A maintenance worker was sent to remove the lock, and in 20 minutes that they waited for him to arrive, police continuously knocked on the door with no response. After finally taking apart the lock on the door, they heard the sound of the lower locks on the door being unlocked, and the door was open, revealing Olivia was inside the apartment all along. Police handcuffed Pena after a struggle, and Olivia was taken to Massachusetts General Hospital, where she told investigators that Pena had taken her phone and would not let her leave the apartment. Pena underwent a 20-day psychological evaluation and was eventually ordered by a judge to remain in prison until his trial date. With over 215,000 followers, Kashawn Cookie Sims, also known by her Instagram handle Cookie Dough, is by no means a small influencer. Kashawn, who is known as Cookie to her friends, uses Instagram to share fitness and beauty tips, and displays her workouts and transformations on her page. However, in September of 2021, Cookie made headlines for a different reason, and became one of California's most bizarre missing person cases. Cookie's family told law enforcement that they had last seen her and heard from her on September 8, 2021, and that they reported her missing soon after when she failed to make contact with them and failed to update her social media profile. After Cookie was reported missing, investigators learned that Cookie had been admitted to a Pasadena hospital on September 11th and 12th, complaining of shortness of breath. With each admission, she was released on the same day, and after that, the trail went cold. Cookie's family made several social media appeals, begging anyone with information to come forward. Cookie's mother told ABC7 that in recent months, her mental health had been on a decline, and they were concerned for her safety and her whereabouts. Thousands of Instagram users chimed in, helping Cookie's family spread the word about her disturbing disappearance. In October of 2021, one of her family members was relieved to have received a phone call from the police and a local hospital informing her that Cookie had been located alive and well. Further details have not been released to the public, and Cookie's Instagram has sat untouched since July of 2021. Cookie's family have also kept the details quiet, but have revealed that Cookie was in good condition and is now being cared for. The disappearance of MH370 is probably the most well-known mass disappearance in recent times, but this modern mystery deserves reiterating. While it's easy to question the authenticity of some ancient disappearances, MH370 reminds us that it really is possible for large groups of people to disappear without a trace. Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 was a flight traveling to Beijing from Kuala Lumpur on March 8, 2014. 2 hours after takeoff, the plane deviated from its planned route, diverting back to fly over Malaysia and then towards the Indian Ocean. During this time, it didn't make any communications with ground control, and all but an automated satellite communication system were disabled. Nobody knows what happened to the flight, why it was diverted, and where the plane lies now. Only 3 wing fragments have been found in the 5 years since the disappearance, and all official searches and investigations into the disappearance have since ended. Some suspect a problem with the flight's oxygen supplies that rendered the passengers and crew unconscious, and the plane continued on autopilot until it ran out of fuel. However, 2 turns in the plane's trajectory were found to have been made manually, meaning at least one person remained conscious long enough to divert the flight. Others suggest that the plane made a water landing for some unknown reason and sank in one piece, which experts say is consistent with the little amount of debris that they had found. Delays in searching mean it is possible, though some believe it's unlikely given the lack of distress calls from the plane. As long as the public remains interested in the case, it's possible a private search could find MH370 and provide answers for the families of the 239 people that were lost aboard. The well-known case of the disappearance of Carol Clay and Russell Hill has finally had a major update after they disappeared on the 20th of March 2020 while they were visiting Virginia. During the investigation, investigators initially assumed that the couple had simply run off together, but later revealed that they believed they had been attacked after they were involved in an altercation with another camper between 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. They added that their attacker very likely set fire to their campsite to cover their tracks before leaving. A number of vehicles were spotted in the area, and they were put under investigation at the time, but one car, a blue 1990s model Nissan Patrol that was spotted on CCTV footage towing a trailer, was of particular interest to them, as every car at the campsite had been accounted for, except for the Nissan. The car was spotted being driven erratically around midnight, the night after it had reached a closed gate located north of the couple's campsite. The driver was forced to make a complicated 20 to 30 point U-turn, hampered by the trailer before leaving the area. A few hours later, a roadside security camera snapped a photo of the car on the Great Alpine Road at Mount Hotham, 37 miles away, just after sunrise. A man named Greg Lynn, who was a Jetstar pilot, was questioned at the time, since he was in the area at the time of the disappearance, but he stated that he hadn't seen Russell and Carol while he was there. His car, a beige Nissan Patrol, was seized as part of the investigation after it was found that Lynn had changed the color of the car on numerous occasions. It was registered in 1997 as a white vehicle, but changed to blue in 2019 and back to beige in 2020. The trailer, however, has still not been found, and police believe that Lynn may have used it to dispose of the couple's bodies before selling it between March and July of 2020. Victoria Police Assistant Commissioner Bob Hill has stated that investigators have found a crime scene in the greater Alpine region, and that a search perimeter is being established. In the hopes that Russell and Carol will be found, forensic specialists will be conducting a search of the area, hopefully cracking the case that has left investigators baffled for over a year. On May 20th, 2021, it started like any other day for the Cannon family from Scotland. 19-year-old Jaime Cannon got dressed into his gray jogging bottoms, gray shoes, and blue jacket, and began the walk to his local college, carrying his camouflage backpack. Jaime was studying bricklaying, and in his spare time, he worked part-time at an Italian restaurant for some extra money. For Jamie's mother, Lynn, she knew that she would return home from work to see her son waiting for her, so that the two could talk about how their days had been. However, the evening of May 20th rolled around, and as the sun began to set, the house was empty. There was no sign of Jaime, and Lynn knew that this was extremely out of character for her son. When Jaime failed to return home or make contact, Lynn called the police to report her son missing. She informed the police that Jamie's phone was broken and that his SIM card hadn't been put into another phone. For police, this meant they were unable to track Jamie's phone and last known location, and instead turned to CCTV cameras to unravel the mystery. CCTV cameras spotted Jaime at 10:26 a.m. walking down Kerr Avenue in Saltcoats. After this, there's no sign of Jaime, apart from a few alleged sightings that have never been confirmed by police. There has been no activity on his bank accounts, and his phone remains switched off and at home. An extensive search and investigation was launched into Jamie's disappearance. However, 7 months later, we're still no closer to figuring out the truth. In November of 2021, Lynn, Jamie's mother, gave her first interview to the Daily Record and told them that for months after Jaime's disappearance, she sat by the window waiting for Jaime to walk through the front door and back into her arms. With Christmas fast approaching, Lynn wants nothing more than to have her son home. If you have any information about Jaime Cannon's disappearance, you're urged to contact Police Scotland at 101, quoting case number 1623 of the 22nd of May. Alternatively, if you wish to remain anonymous, you can call Crime Stoppers at 0800 555 111. On the 9th of October 2019, the wife of 37-year-old Ryan Linaman from Lee's Summit reported him missing as he'd not returned home as scheduled. Police searched Linaman's 2004 Honda Accord, but after trying to locate the position of his cell phone, checking his credit card activity, checking a license plate reader database, and checking his social media for updates, they'd still not found him. Friends and family of Linaman's were interviewed for any information on his whereabouts, but this too proved to be fruitless. As the days went by, the chances of finding Linaman were slimming, and his family became increasingly worried. Then, 7 days after he had disappeared, a man who was riding his dirt bike stumbled upon the man's missing car. It turns out that Linaman had been driving along the I-470 just 7 minutes from his home, where he'd crashed into a sign and down a hill on the side of the interstate. The car continued through thick grass, up a dirt mound, and careened into a ravine where it came to a rest. At first, the man on the dirt bike thought it was just a car that had been abandoned there, but upon looking inside, he realized that someone was inside the vehicle. He assumed that Linaman had died in the crash and immediately phoned for help, but when police arrived, they realized that he was still breathing, but he'd suffered serious injuries during the crash. The spot where the car had come to a stop was covered in thick brush, and it would have been impossible for anyone driving to see the car from the highway. Police stated that due to the severity of his injuries, it was unlikely that Linaman had moved at all during the week that he'd spent in the ravine, and that if he had not been found in such a fortunate manner, it was likely that it would have been down there for a long time. Linaman was taken to the hospital in critical condition, and due to his injuries, he passed away 3 days later on October 19th. Unlike many mysteriously abandoned villages, we have evidence the small town of Kuldara was a very real place, mostly because it still stands today. The ruins of Kuldara, which was actually a collection of villages, are maintained by the Archaeological Survey of India and can be visited by tourists. However, to this day, we don't know what happened to the people who once lived there. Kuldara was located in the harsh, dry tar desert, but the former inhabitants had used their knowledge of the rock formations to build a thriving agricultural community that lasted hundreds of years. Over 600 buildings were found in the area and were once home to about 1,500 people. However, in the space of just a few generations, the population rapidly declined. Legends say the town was abandoned overnight and the community that lived there were never seen again, though the reason why is various. The most plausible reason is that the wells in the area rapidly dried up, and within the span of only a few years, water supplies had dwindled so much that the community could no longer support itself. Some theories add to this and suggest a hostile army poisoned whatever wells were left with rotting meat, forcing the villagers to abandon their homes and move on. Another popular tale is that the corrupt government minister asked for the village's chief's daughter hand in marriage and claimed that he would raise taxes on any villager that stood in his way. Rather than give the daughter up, the entire village apparently packed up overnight and left before the minister could take his bride. Before leaving though, they apparently cursed the site so nobody could ever live there again. Whatever the truth is to the legends, it's true that nobody has called Kuldara home for over 200 years. While it's likely the village was abandoned over a much larger period of time than one night, many have claimed to have experienced paranormal activity while visiting the site. The Paranormal Society of New Delhi has allegedly witnessed haunting voices, footprints in the mud, and moving shadows during investigations at the site. The ghost town can only be visited in the day, with its gates closed at dusk, adding to the area's mysterious feel. On the 27th of January, 1976, 22-year-old Kyle Clinkscales was working at a bar called the Moose Club in LaGrange, Georgia, where he was a bartender. After returning home after his shift, he planned to make a 35-mile drive to Auburn University in Alabama, where he was a student. But he never made it there, and he was reported as a missing person. Despite extensive searches, neither Kyle nor his white 1974 Ford Pinto runabout was ever found. And at first, it was believed that he'd disappeared of his own free will, as he wasn't doing well at college and had previously dropped out of another school. But as time went by without any contact from Kyle, his family started to believe that he had met with foul play, though no evidence was ever found to support their theory. In 1981, a man named Danny Moore contacted police, stating that he believed he was Kyle Clinkscales. He had been in a car accident in 1976 that caused him to have amnesia. He wrote a letter to Kyle's parents, and they believed his handwriting matched Kyle's. But when his dental records were checked, it was found that he wasn't Kyle. Then in 2005, a man contacted his parents and claimed that he saw Kyle's body being disposed of when he was just 7 years old. He added that it had been covered with concrete inside of a barrel and dumped in a pond. But police soon learned that this wasn't true, and the man was charged with 2 counts of making false statements. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 7 years and 8 months in prison. For 45 years, police followed up every lead in Kyle's disappearance, but kept coming up empty-handed. That is, until December of 2021, when a man called 911 to report that he had spotted a car in a creek in Alabama. Inside the car, investigators found Kyle's wallet, ID, credit cards, and human remains believed to be his. The car was found about 3 miles from the normal route that Kyle would have taken back and forth to college, and it isn't known if that area was searched when he was first reported as a missing person. After the car was removed from the creek, the tag number was run through the Troup County Sheriff's Office, who confirmed that it belonged to Kyle. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation has been called to investigate whether the remains that were found are Kyle's, and if it's possible to determine how he ended up driving into the creek. Kyle was an only child, and his father and mother passed away in 2007 and 2021 respectively. A major breakthrough has occurred in the missing person case of 84-year-old Miriam Hemphill, who disappeared without a trace on the 22nd of July, 2005. At the time of her disappearance, Miriam was driving a beige 1999 Buick LeSabre with tag number ABA676 and was believed to be headed to Blount County or Sevier County. Her husband Bill became concerned when he found that she'd cut out a newspaper clipping where a person had driven their car into a lake, and he feared she may have done the same. Oak Ridge police detective Bill Griffith, who was investigating the mysterious disappearance, initially believed that Miriam's car would be found within 6 months. But when winter came and the ground cover disappeared, it still wasn't found, and he started to agree with her husband's theory. But despite appeals to the community and extensive searches, they were unable to find any trace of Miriam, and her missing person case went cold. But at 3:30 p.m. on the 11th of November 2021, the Oak Ridge Police Department released a statement saying that they had pulled a car from Melton Hill Lake after receiving a tip from divers who had stumbled on the vehicle. They added that a person was found inside the vehicle and that the car was indeed registered to Miriam. The Oak Ridge Fire Department aided the Blount County Rescue Squad, Maryville Police Department, and the Alcoa Fire Department in the recovery of the car and helped out in sifting through the silt that had built up in the car. They also stated that the car was being deconstructed to look for further clues as to what transpired on the day that Miriam drove into the lake. Unfortunately, Bill passed away on the 22nd of June, 2016 at the age of 95, without ever knowing for certain what happened to his wife. Angelica Gayton, a 46-year-old woman from Puerto Colombia, was reported missing by her family in 2018. She suffered from mental health problems, which materialized after she'd suffered a heart attack. Her mental issues included a phobia of upmarket cars. Her daughter told a local newspaper that whenever she saw a high-end car, she would cower, screaming that they were coming to get her. The last time that they heard from her, she'd moved to Ecuador to live with her brother, claiming that she was a victim of domestic violence from her husband. In reality, she'd been living on the street for 2 years until she found accommodation at a crisis shelter. Then in 2020, after finding out that Angelica's husband was in fact not living in the city, shelter staff told her that she would have to leave as she was not in any danger from her abuser. Upon learning that she would once again be homeless, she took a bus to the beach where she spent some time staring at the sky. She decided that she wanted to end her life and proceeded to enter the shark-infested waters. For at least 8 hours, she floated in the sea, surrendering to the current. 2 local fishermen were in the area at the time and told media that they spotted a log drifting in the sea, but as they approached, they realized that it was in fact a woman floating on her back with her eyes closed. The men pulled her onto the boat and found that she was unresponsive to their questions, only showing emotion once they gave her fresh water to drink. Once she was brought ashore, she was driven to the emergency department of a local hospital where she was found to be suffering from hypothermia. Angelica's family has refuted her claims that she was abused by her husband, as well as the claims that she was forced out of the shelter due to him leaving the city, as he had never lived there in the first place. In the end, she was seen floating in the ocean less than 1.2 miles from the shelter where she had been staying. About 5 years ago, 43 teaching students from Mexico became victims of corrupt police and political turmoil when they disappeared from police custody. What little traces of the students that have been found have been called into question due to issues with the investigation, and the real fate of the young men remains unknown. Like many student teachers in the area, the group were politically active and often attended protests and rallies. September 26, 2014 was no different, and the group of 80 to 120 students gathered to demonstrate against what they saw as discriminatory hiring practices for teachers. At the end of the day, they gathered onto a group of buses to take them home. This practice of commandeering buses wasn't unusual. While it was a nuisance for public transportation users, the buses were usually returned once the students were finished with it. In this case, the students claimed the bus drivers had actually agreed to take them home, though police said the buses were hijacked, resulting in a violent attempt to stop the students. On their way home, police attempted to blockade the buses and opened fire. 6 people were killed in the shootout, including an innocent woman traveling in a nearby taxi, and the driver and passenger of another bus, which police mistakenly believed carried students. Most of the students were able to flee, but 43 were rounded up and forced into police vehicles. What happened after that continues to be debated. Official reports say police handed the students to a drug cartel, who drove them to a rubbish dump where they were killed and their bodies were burned. However, there's next to no evidence that this really happened, and families dispute this story. International investigators who work for human rights watchdogs were called to try to solve the mystery. They discovered authorities used torture to get confessions from those accused of kidnapping the students, and many of the accused were released. Later investigations came up with a chilling theory. The government report concluded that students had commandeered 4 buses, but later international investigators discovered a 5th bus had been used. Officials later claimed this bus malfunctioned and the students abandoned it, something which also emerged to be untrue. Government photos of the bus were compared to security footage from the depot where it had been taken from, and investigators concluded that this wasn't the same bus. They theorized the students must have unknowingly hijacked a bus that was filled with heroin, or at least specifically adapted to be used to smuggle drugs, a known practice in the area. Police and government officials took up arms to stop the students from taking the bus out of the city and potentially uncovering their role in a drug smuggling scheme. Many more theories have been proposed, but the families of the missing 43 are still asking for answers and for their loved ones to be returned. 18-year-old Kylie Reek is just like any other teenager her age, hoping to find herself in the big city and figure out who she is and what the future has in store for her. Kylie was a member of the Fort Peck tribes in Poplar, Montana, and had moved to San Francisco in early 2021 to kickstart her journey of finding herself and seeing what the world had to offer. However, in July of 2021, Anita Lachesi, her advocate, became increasingly worried when she couldn't contact Kylie. On July 24, 2021, Anita and Kylie unknowingly shared their last phone call. And by the end of the week, Anita knew that something was terribly wrong when all of her calls were going straight to voicemail. Kylie's friends tried reaching out to her via Facebook, but these messages also went unanswered. Her social media was untouched, which is incredibly unusual for an 18-year-old in 2021. Anita had become Kylie's advocate through a program created by the Sovereign Bodies Institute that aims to help Indigenous women who have faced violence because of their race and gender. By all accounts, Kylie was a sweet and hard-working girl, and it was extremely out of character for her to disappear without making contact with Anita or her friends. Authorities believed that Kylie had possibly befriended an older man and began searching through her phone records and social media accounts to obtain more evidence. Weeks passed without any word in Kylie's case, and the attention surrounding her disappearance began to fade. Then on October 25, 2021, Anita received a phone call from the San Francisco Police Department. As the call connected, Anita hoped that she wasn't about to hear the news that she had been dreading. Incredibly, the San Francisco Police Department was calling to let Anita know that Kylie had been located safely in Oregon. Since August 25th, there have been no further updates in her case, but we're thankful that she is home and safe. The missing person case involving 69-year-old David Neely began in 2006 when he was working on a horse ranch in California. His disappearance was seen as suspicious since another man, 63-year-old Donald Kavanaugh, who also had ties to the ranch, disappeared in March of the previous year. Both men had altercations with their boss, James Denoyer, who was Donald's nephew, after they found that the horses on Denoyer's ranch were not being looked after properly. Donald disappeared after Denoyer secured 14 of his horses, and seemingly had no more use for him. David's disappearance came about in a similar way after he contacted authorities about the state of the ranch, and an investigation was launched into the ranch. Both men had told people close to them that they were on their way to collect their belongings from the ranch when they were never seen or heard from again. David was last seen by a family member in April of 2006, and his car was later discovered on a property in Westport, but no further leads were ever found and the case went cold. But then in May of 2020, a private nature reserve employee in Branscombe contacted the sheriff's office and reported that he had found human remains about 3.5 miles from where David's car was discovered. After DNA analysis was done and dental records were examined in 2021, it was found that they belonged to David. There was no evidence of trauma found, and the sheriff's office has stated that the investigation into David's disappearance is still continuing. David's daughter, Lisa, has previously stated that she suspected foul play was involved in her father's mysterious disappearance, and she's now more hopeful that her family will find answers and closure after more than 15 years of uncertainty. On Wednesday, the 29th of June, 2010, neighbors of Rich Ranga, a resident of Lake Township in Ohio, were woken up to the sound of an explosion at about 3 a.m. They got up and looked outside to see what may have caused the blast, but couldn't see any fire and decided to go back to bed. At about 6:30 a.m., a friend of Rich, named Dave, traveled to Rich's home to pick him up for a court date that was scheduled for later that morning. Rich was expected to appear in Newton County Court on charges that he was operating while intoxicated, and had arranged for Dave to give him a ride there. When Dave arrived at the house, he stepped out of his car and was immediately aware of a strong smell of gas. After noticing that the west side of Rich's house had been all but demolished, he phoned 911. Lake Township Fire Department responded and found that the whole house had become unstable. After determining that the house was too unsafe to search as is, they called for assistance from District 1 Technical Rescue in Crown Point, who were able to provide equipment that stabilized the house to the point where they could search for Rich. In the meantime, Dave had been phoning Rich's cell phone continuously without getting a response. Once the house was finally searched, the man had still not been found, but one of the rescuers found a note on the second story addressed to Dave, saying that he would be spending the night at his mother's house. After calling off the search, Rich's mother was contacted and stated that he had, in fact, not been to her house after all. The search was started once again, but by 11:30, they'd still not located the man's body, and the Lake Township Assistant Chief, Jim Simmons, called for a cadaver dog to be brought to the scene, but the dog also found no trace of him. Then on the following morning, Rich's family members found him in a garage not too far from his house. He was taken to the local hospital where he was treated for minor burns after the explosion had melted his sweatshirt to the back of his head. An arrest warrant was then issued for Rich as he failed to appear in court, and he was handed over to police upon being discharged from the hospital. The strange case of Vila Verde in Brazil is one of the most mysterious mass disappearances in the world, mostly because we have such little information to make any theories on. The story goes that in 1923, travelers to the village came across deserted streets and abandoned buildings. Vila Verde was supposed to be home to around 600 people, a fairly average town for the area, but not one person was around. They found some of the windows and doors to buildings had been damaged, but there was no evidence of any violence. Police were called and an investigation to find the missing people was launched. They found no signs of a struggle, and it seemed the village's inhabitants had left of their own free will. Migration in the area wasn't exactly uncommon at the time. This was a time of political turmoil in the area. The year before, Artur da Silva Bernardes was elected as president and faced political struggles throughout his time in office. It was speculated that the village was evacuated due to or to avoid conflict with guerrilla fighters. However, there were a number of issues with this theory, such as a large migration of people would have been noticed by the surrounding villages, but nobody knew anything of Vila Verde's abandonment. Furthermore, none of the village locals had turned up in the years since its abandonment to explain what had happened. This has led many to believe nobody who lived in the village had survived long enough to reveal what had really happened. The two most mysterious clues were found at an abandoned school. Investigators found a used rifle which apparently showed signs of being fired as recently as the day before. What it was fired at remains unknown as there were no signs of violence. Even stranger, written on the chalkboard was the phrase "there is no salvation," which has been hypothesized as being part of the phrase "there's no salvation without the church," a Catholic phrase. This would suggest that the students have been in the middle of a religious study class when the town was abandoned, though the reason why 600 people suddenly left has never been found. 38-year-old Jesse McFaren was last seen in the early morning hours of October 23, 2021, and his case is one of the most mysterious missing person cases in recent Oregon history. Jesse owns the Fancy Rabbit Art Collective tattoo shop in McMinnville, Oregon, and is well known in the local tattooing community. While his business was going well, cracks were beginning to show in his private life. According to his wife Victoria, the couple had been experiencing problems in their marriage in recent months, and had decided to spend some time apart. Despite spending time apart, Jesse always made sure to be there for their son, and his stepchild, who is Victoria's child from a previous relationship. Jesse also had a child with another woman from a previous relationship. Victoria commented that he was always there for all his children and would have done anything for them. On October 22, 2021, Jesse spent the night with friends in Tigard, Oregon. By the time the friends had woken up, there was no sign of Jesse anywhere, and when he failed to contact them, they began to panic. According to phone records and testimonies, Jesse met with a friend that morning around 4:30 a.m. to collect some stuff that he had left in his car. After this, he was never seen again. The last activity on Jesse's cell phone was at around 5:30 a.m. when he sent a text to the mother of his oldest child. But after that, the trail ran cold. When Jesse failed to show up, his friends and wife knew that something was very wrong. Victoria called the police and reported her husband missing. Her panic was compounded by the fact that the two had been having marital issues and hoped and prayed that Jesse was safe. As of December of 2021, the Yamhill County Sheriff's Office and Jesse's friends and family are continuing their search for him and are releasing information and press releases where possible. Jesse is described as a white male, 6'4", 180 pounds, with brown eyes and a shaved head. He has a nose ring in each nostril, and his whole body is covered in tattoos. The most distinctive tattoo is of a bird on his left cheek. Anyone with information is urged to contact the Yamhill County Sheriff's Office on 503-434-7506, quoting case number 213397. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.